Today we welcome Bob Hill. Bob is a retired clinical psychologist who practiced for over 30 years in the Richmond and Abingdon areas, and he has spoken at this church since 1988. Bob's talk today is titled, A New Year, a New You. Sounds exciting. And he will take a look at the turning of the decade and a questioning examination of New Year resolutions. Welcome, Bob.
Good morning. A new you. Once a year, our society, I think, unconsciously agrees to make changes in their lives. Individually, we consciously decide how we want to be different. We resolve to be better today than we were yesterday. We make New Year's resolutions. Why do we decide to make changes? We decide because we live in social groups. We see others that we want to emulate. We see people who are healthier or who are more successful, or people we read about who do admirable things. We look in the mirror and we confront the unfinished business of our lives. It's our reference to other people that motivates us to make changes. If we lived an isolated life, avoiding contact with all others, we might not decide to lose weight or quit smoking or study more or to exercise. We might not make the effort to be a little nicer, to work harder, or to give more of ourselves to others. But we don't live in isolation. Our lives are filled with other people. There are references everywhere. So when we look, we compare ourselves to people around us. We observe that some people who are toxic while others are nourishing, and we try to choose the more nourishing examples. At the same time, we work pretty hard to avoid repulsive behavior. We not only learn from all of those around us, we learn from great souls who lived long before our term. Humanity has struggled to elevate itself since our very beginning. Philosophers, poets, leaders, and keen observers have been writing about the human condition since the invention of the alphabet. Fortunately, we have preserved some of their work, and we often use it to guide our behavior. Their voices whisper to us from the past. We can use some things written thousands of years ago. We can also use things that someone said just yesterday to reinvent ourselves, to be new, fresh, a better person. Part of what we are about is improving ourselves, and at the same time we are elevating the consciousness of all humanity. We're not just working for one person. We are linked with all people in that human chain. We can use the beginning of this new year to celebrate that process. Each new year brings a fresh start. We can, in a sense, reinvent who we are. To use religious terms, I guess we could be born again. Pardon that. Out of the ashes of our many mistakes, we can raise the phoenix fire of us. We are all influenced in profound ways by the ideas of others, both the living and the dead. Their ideas capture us and shape us and make us who we are. Without others, we would each have to reinvent the wheel by ourselves. Many great ideas are so strong that they use us, and we become the instrument of ideas such as democracy, freedom, free thought, self-illumination. Without the ideas of others and the internal drive to elevate and reinvent ourselves, we would still be animals of the forest and the fields. In examining the distant whispers of those who have gone before us, we can find personal meaning in their words and stories. Different societal groups often approach growth in seemingly different directions, but they do converge. For example, Eastern religious philosophies ask that we work to rid ourselves of the ego, to be more pure, whereas in Western philosophy, it asks us to tune and train our ego to get it in the best possible shape, so when we give it back to God, it's more perfect. We can easily reconcile these two seemingly different views by realizing that they are both urging us to govern our ego and not be puppets to our own ego. So our reinvention of self at the beginning may conclude in part that the realization that the stars and planets do not revolve around us. We are but a part of a vast whole. We are no more or no less than just a part of that vast interconnected web of life. We must therefore learn the value of cooperation over competition, of helping over blind indifference, of love over fear. Western religious philosophy would tell us that what you do is more important than what you feel. Eastern religious philosophy would teach us the reverse, that what you feel inside is more important than what you do. St. John of the Order of the Cross argues for the Western view. He said, and I quote, "If you were in an ecstasy as deep as St. Paul, and a sick man needed a cup of soup, it is better for you to return from that ecstasy for love's sake and bring him a cup of soup." Close quote. St. Ignatius of Loyola phrased it this way, quote, "How much more in God's sight is one act of charity performed by the will than all the visions and ecstasies they receive from heaven," close quote. A hallmark of human elevation is consciousness, a remarkable quality of helping others. It is human beings that pull us out of burning buildings and off of rooftops and floods. It is our neighbors and friends that reach out to us in times of need, who comfort us in tragedy, and who hold us when we are hurting. This has been going on since our very beginning. It is not religion that makes us humane, but it is our human nature. We can override the moronic lessons that we have been taught about how different we are from other people. We can look past religious idiosyncrasies and see that we are much more similar than we are different. We can be better today than we were yesterday. We must learn to listen to the great souls that teach us, excuse me, even from the grave. We can follow in the footsteps of humane teachers and learn how to help each other climb, and we can do it with honest cheer. There's a wonderful medieval teaching story that illustrates this point. It seems that there was a monk in a European monastery who wanted more than anything to see a vision of the Virgin Mary. He spent most of his life, day and night, in prayer and meditation, hoping for his vision of the Virgin Mary. One day, the vision came, but it was just as the bell rang to read the poor at the back gate of the monastery. It was his job to go to that back gate and hand out bread to the poor. He felt torn by the prospects of losing his vision if he went to do his job. Nevertheless, he stood to go, making apologies to the vision as he left. He returned after feeding the poor, but his heart was heavy, and he felt a great loss. Much to his surprise, the vision was still there. And he apologized again, and the vision said to him, "If thou hadst stayed, I must have fled." Eastern religious philosophy doesn't reject the idea of giving, and certainly not of loving, but it strongly promotes the necessity of the self-search. We must find ourselves through intuitive processes, while at the same time journey toward the whole. Because we are not separate, we are a part of the whole. Most of what humans seek is an illusion. The Bhagavad Gita says, and I quote, "One to me is shame or fame. One to me is joy or pain. One to me is loss or gain." Close quote. For a more recent idea of that same interpretation, we go to Rudyard Kipling's poem, If. Kipling says, and I quote, "If you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same," close quote. Later in the poem, Kipling says, and I quote, "If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose your common touch," close quote. So much of our daily lives is not authentically us. we end up participating in the common illusions of life. We end up being one person in one situation and a completely different person in another situation. Our struggle should be for oneness, to be our own person in all situations. Do these voices from the past help us decide what illusions we will let go of at this new beginning? What are the things that you are working so hard for to let go of? The quest for things, the quest for recognition, the quest for power are all false quests. So many things we seek are really the distractions in life, paying no attention to honor the essence of life. Both our Eastern and Western religious traditions promote the idea of tuning and training oneself. The term atonement means intunement and at one-ment. As you work to reshape yourself with your New Year's resolutions, will you strive to be in tune with and at one with all living things? It is so very normal to get trapped in the mind's whirlwind, trying to decide what to do and what to choose. There are so many seductive options leading us away from our authentic self. These questions offer material things, society's recognition, false power, false victory. So we compete rather than cooperate. We grab it and we growl and we slip further from our own enlightenment. Plato reminds us that the human mind is like being in a mutiny at sea, where the captain and the navigator are locked below, and all of the sailors are running in different directions. The Roman mystic Plotinus says that the human mind is like a choir before the choir master arrives. We must learn to release the captain and allow the choir master to take charge. Part of reshaping ourselves requires that we take command of our own mind. And we must demand the best of ourselves. It's a hard lesson, but we owe it to ourselves to refuse to be anything but ourselves. How do we learn to be true to ourselves? Perhaps the best way is to witness those who refuse to be broken into pieces and to emulate those who will not be chameleons for the sake of others. According to legend, the 18th century teacher, philosopher, and spiritual leader Rabbi Zosha was just that type of person. Once his congregation asked him to take some special position on an issue in the church. He refused to take that position because it was against his personal conscience. When he refused, his congregation confronted him, and they said, "Rabbi Zosha, if Moses was here, he would do it." To which Rabbi Zosha replied, "When I stand before God, he will not say to me, 'Zosha, why were you not Moses? He will say to me, Sasha, why were you not Sasha? Each of us must find our own path. Isaac Luria, the 16th century mystical teacher, wrote that there are over 1,600,000 words in the Torah. These symbolize the 600,000 life paths for human beings. The answer for each of us lies in the idea of bliss. We have to find our own special song, our own rhythm, our own bliss. And no one can tell us what is best for us. St. Thomas of Aquinas put it this way, and I quote, anything you do which is good for your own individuality is also good for your relationship with God. How many of us really invest in the idea of improving ourselves? It's easy to make resolutions, but how many people really invest in redesigning yourself? It requires will and effort to change. The idea of giving all that we are to something reminds me of the story of the juggler of Notre Dame. The teaching story goes like this. Every year, people brought gifts to be placed at the feet of the statue of Our Lady during the festival of Notre Dame. There was a juggler who was penniless. He had absolutely nothing to give. So after everyone else was gone, he stood before the statue and he juggled. He was seen doing this, and so he was arrested, and he was to be taken away and killed for heresy. Just as he was being dragged from the room, the statue stepped down from her pedestal and said, "He gave me his all. Did you?" The message that the church wants you to hear is that once you commit completely. Of course, it also conveys the senseless brutality that we find in some religions for thousands of years, but that's another story and another topic for another time. Giving now is the topic that we are speaking of. To give, and I think we agree is important, but how do we give? Giving comes under that broad category of charity. The interesting thing about charity, from the ancient Greek, charity means keratos, or the Greek word is keratos, meaning caring. There are far more ways to care than just to give money that can be written off of our taxes. I suppose it was the fundraisers of the world that made the world caring synonymous with charitable giving. The most important way to give, of course, is to give of ourselves. As we discussed earlier, we are not isolated. We live in community. And therefore, we must give something to that community if we expect something back from that community. Giving and receiving are different aspects on the same continuum. We must learn to be the cheerful giver and the grateful receiver. Now, to be sure, there are some people who are so gushy and so sweet that just to be around them will throw you into sugar shock. I'm talking about authentic concern for life. We are a foul soul if we take all the privileges of community and none of the responsibility to that community. So to give of yourself is to give to life, and life will return like in kind. It's the law of cause and effect. How well did you do with your New Year's resolutions last year? I didn't do very well. How hard is it to work for yourself? Growth takes effort, and far too often growth will not come without energy on your own part. I have a friend, a very close friend, who goes from financial crisis to financial crisis. So a few years ago, I gave him an audio cassette binder and an accompanying book on how to become financially independent. After about 6 months, I asked him how he liked the program. To my vexation, he had not put the first tape in the tape cassette machine, and he had not opened the book. And he said to me, "Bob, I just didn't have time. Why don't you just tell me in a few words what it said?" I gave 3 or 4 of these packets to people, and not one of them really used it. The great yoga teacher, Sri Chinmoy, who died a couple of years ago, once said, and I quote, "Most people are willing to do anything for their own advancement except work for it." We each have to ask if we're willing to put more into self-growth this coming year than we did last year. I'm reminded that the medieval monks spent their lives training their ability not only to love and to care and to give of themselves, but also to listen in silence. They spent hours in meditation as well as hours serving the poor. Because of their very long hours of training, they call themselves the athletes of God. In today's society, so many go from one thing to another thing, trying to find themselves. They go from Zen to yoga, from meditation to jazzercise, from jogging to aromatherapy, without ever taking the time to really invest in anything. If we want it, we have to give the work it requires. The mystic teacher Gurdjieff said, quote, "It is impossible to give a man anything that would be his inalienable property without work on his part." Perhaps everything I've said today is leading up to one thing: love. Love is necessary and sufficient. It is the soul food for life. The one lesson that crosses our many different religious traditions is love thy neighbor as thyself. Now, it's important to note, it says love thy neighbor as thyself. not less than thyself, not more than thyself, but thyself. St. John of the Cross wrote, "In the evening of your life, you shall be judged by love." Close quote. And I'm sure this means self-love. A large number of people feel their only value is in doing things. If they're not doing, they feel worthless. They are human doings, not human beings. If you were really your own best friend, how would you treat yourself? If you were really interested in that, you'd work harder for you. Frequently, I used to tell people in session, if I were going to hire somebody to take care of you, I wouldn't even give you an interview. We are not only our brother's keeper, we are also our brother. As I treat you, I treat myself. One of the most difficult things we have to learn about love is that loving someone means letting that person be their own person. It is so easy for us to think that we always know what's best for everybody else. This gets into the realm of judging others. We should practice that beautiful internal art of non-judgment. Because we all are judged, we feel like that we are free to, no, actually obligated to judge others. When it comes to parenting, the ideal parent is a person who allows the child to become themselves, not the parent who wants a carbon copy of me. When it comes to parenting oneself, which is probably the hardest job of all, we must remember that it is only a fierce and tender concern for the self that potentiates our healing. And let's face it, we all need healing from something. Life gives us nicks and bruises, bumps and trauma, tragedy and curves that must be dealt with. Healing is a constant process. Loving the self is the soothing salve that restores our will to go on. The last thing I want to talk about is humor. Life is funny. Even some of the worst things that can happen to us are filled with humor. A year or so ago, I received a phone call telling me that a friend of mine had just died. After the initial shock and the accompanying sadness, the caller and I ended up laughing. We laughed about the stories of our mutual friend. He was funny. He was zany. And this is one of those friends that it was impossible to think about without the humorous stories of his life. Even in death, we are left with memories of good times and fun events. Let the bad times go for the sake of your own health, but relive over and over and over the funny things that have happened to you and to those around you. And by all means, avoid like the plague those humorless drones who know no joy. They are toxic to the soul. St. Teresa of Avila said, and I quote, God, save us from sober and serious saints. Close quote. No one can make your resolutions for you, and no one can see that you follow through but you. Changing, tweaking, reshaping, or reinventing you is exclusively in your hands. And after all, who would want it to be any different? You are the sculptor and the sculpture. Whatever you do, you are the only judge of your work. Realistically, working on ourselves is hard work, and it usually takes a long time, and we are impatient creatures. There is no magical gateway that we walk through and suddenly we're finished. Growth comes in small degrees. Be patient with yourself. So as you start this new beginning, my wish for each of you, my family members, may you have the interest of a child in people, the fascination of a child in things, and the belief of a child in the beauty, goodness, and joy of life. Have a great year. I love you all. Thank you.